You were a very young man when you got involved with this project.
Yeah, I was 22. I'd just come from university and I joined Granada. I'd done 6 months on a general training course, but the great thing about Granada was it was a very small company, so it couldn't really afford to train you, so you really had to do it on the job. And the first job I got was as a researcher on this one-off documentary. It was just going to be one documentary looking at England in 1963-64. It was my first job.
And now here you are.
Here I am.
This was a project that would consume all the rest of your life, and it still isn't finished.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a sense, it's the perimeter of my life in a way. I mean, my work in life, it's the first thing I'll do, and it's still going on. And who would have thought that 40 odd years later, 42 years later, we'd still be doing it, still be talking about it.
That's the remarkable thing to me about the film, because, and you can call it the film or the films. In a way it's one work, in a way it's a work that's still being finished. Some people coming to it now can see it all at once, immediately, but for you making it, for me watching it, I've grown up 7 years between each film, just as the characters have, and it's become part of my life, because as they grow older and as they go through these things, so do I, and so do you.
Yeah, so it's a different perception, isn't it? I mean, people who see it now and catch up with it, it's sort of like almost like reality television, except you get it's instant gratification for them. People who came out on a box set, people who saw the box set, then come to me and say, "When's the next one? When is the next one?" But it's a whole different rhythm. And now, once you're trapped into it, you have to wait and sit it out. But it must be odd, for people who see the whole thing, however quickly they see it, but basically in one big chunk. What effect does it have on them? Is it as meaningful to them? I don't know. Those of us who have grown up with it, it becomes, as you say, part of our lives. And also, I think it gives us a strong political context. Because one thing I've always avoided doing is putting big political signposts in it, saying, I did it once in 42 and it never worked, I cut it out. It was the year Diana was killed. And so I asked them all about that, just to give it some sense of time and place.
Right.
But it just seemed trivial. Not that the event was trivial, but it seemed the film only really works when it's about them, and the politics of the film are their lives and the way their lives change. They dramatize politics. They don't discuss the abstract of politics. They are political. Their lives are political statements, like Tony wanting to leave the country, tired of Blair, tired of 8 years of the Labour government, all that sort of thing, fed up with it all. I mean, that's a political statement. It isn't him pontificating about it. And so, when you live through the films that we have, then you're always in the political context of the time. When you see it in a great bulk, then it must be odd. You must sometimes feel you're in a time capsule or something.
There was a person on the internet who got the box set and started to watch the first film. And during the next 24 hours, although not necessarily consecutively, had seen them all. And then posted this notice saying that it was a metaphysical experience for him, that in a way he had seen not their lives, but life itself flashing across his screen.
Yeah,
because that's what it is. It's what life is like.
And it's your own life too.
Yes.
I mean, you'll see your own life flash past. I mean, if you're sat here in Chicago watching it, it's a different, a different power than if you're sat in London. I mean, in my great country, but you must be watching your own life go through, which is the power of the thing. I always felt that, it's everyone can relate to a little bit of it, somewhere along the lines. Apart from the big view, the overview of it all, there's something in it for everybody. I think a piece of a memory, a piece of a relationship. Something someone says, some response that someone has that sort of connects with everybody who'll watch it.
The whole crowd in the 49 Up film seem happier than they have been in general. Some of them have been happy before, but there seems to be a reconciliation with life, an acceptance, or a certain serenity in many of them.
I think that's interesting, because I think one of the interesting things about seeing all the films, having them all in front of you, and not having to wait 7 years, is they're all quite different. the tone of them is quite different, I've always felt. And I never know what the tone is until I've shot the film, until I start putting it together. But for example, 35, there was a lot of them were losing their parents.
Elegiac, yeah.
You know, and so there was a sense of mortality about it. There was a kind of awareness that, you know, life isn't forever. That things leave you, things go on, things move on. And then, as you say, at 49, there seems to be an acceptance, not in a negative way, but really a kind of just, you know, the fact of knowing who you are, having a certain confidence in your own, and being, I suppose the cliche, being comfortable in your own skin.
Which is used by one of the characters for the first time, she says.
Right. And then, you know, look at 28, that's very, in a sense, almost overbearing, the way that they are sort of so full of confidence and so full of, and indeed at 21, you know. And so there's a different atmosphere to each of the films.
At 21, there's a lot of uncertainty too.
Yes.
And some angst.
Yes.
And is it Susie who's the chain smoker?
Completely
Yes.
changed from 21 to
21 to 28, it's as dramatic as Neil.
Yes.
Between 35 and 42. It's incredible because she flowers into a self-confident, charming woman who's comfortable with herself, and at 21 she looked like she was coming to pieces.
No, she's a strange story because by all accounts I've lost her now. I mean, in 49 she sort of signs off and says, I'm not doing any more. But she's one of the great stories of the series, and you know, people really like her, people really respond to her in a way that I don't think she quite grasped.
Oh, I liked her in 49.
Yeah, she's wonderful, and yet I don't know what it is, but she finds it tremendously difficult to do in A Great Invasion. I think I've lost her.
Yeah, because this isn't a documentary about these lives so much as a documentary about life.
Yes.
And as you sense them at the various ages, you look at them physically, they've changed. You can still see the face of the child.
Absolutely.
All the way through life, but nevertheless, hair falls out and waistlines expand. And at the same time, what the tone of their voice tells us is really more important than having another half an hour of information about biographically what they did in the last 7 years.
I agree, and I've had an instinct about that too, and so I've always tried to keep it crisp, to keep it moving, and not to kind of let it get maudlin or self-indulgent or whatever, because I think, you know, you just need to keep the thing moving. You need to keep, because there's a lot of information when you're not just absorbing what's happening to them now, but you're reabsorbing what happened to them before. All those kind of, you know, impulses that you're getting that fed into your nervous system. So I've always tried to keep it under some sort of control. But yes, and what's been interesting with 49 is now I've got new technology. Now this is the first one I've done on digital, which is a huge benefit to me because I can do very long interviews. Before, all the way up to 42, we were doing them on film, and so after every 10 minutes you'd have to change roles. And it was very hard to kind of keep focused, to try and get after them, you know, get underneath them, get into them, and all this sort of stuff when you kept having to stop and start. Now I can shoot for 38 minutes without stopping. And also you need less equipment, so it's a much more intimate relationship between me and them. There's not a large crew around. So the technology, the change of technology has been very, very interesting and useful to me.
You've said that a couple of things you did which you regretted. There were two characters where you thought you could anticipate what would happen in their lives. And one of them you were right, although you were a bit off on your time scheme. And the other one you were wrong. Tony is a good way to start the film because he is so happy down there in Spain with his swimming pool.
I know.
And that little boy at the beginning looks like Truffaut's hero in 400 Blows. He's peering out of the screen in bafflement. And here is this confident 49-year-old, expansive, happy man who has some complaints, but he's been able to solve those by getting his holiday cottage, and he and his wife are working hard.
That's right. Yeah.
It's incredible.
But he embraces life, doesn't he? I mean, he just attacks life with such. You know, he's hard work because he's so enthusiastic. You know, he's so full of everything, so full of ideas. So it's sort of tiring being around him sometimes. But you know, he has done incredibly well when you think
yet,
about it.
when he was 21, you were convinced he was going to be a criminal.
I was. I mean, it's this terrible, terrible impulse to play God. which is one of the attractions of the film, but it's something that I can't indulge myself in. It's fun for you to watch it and say, well, I think this is what is going to happen to them, but if I make the next film, in a sense, you know, with some agenda, then it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's exactly what I did. You know, I tried to predict what was going to happen to Tony. I tried to predict what was going to happen to, you know, to Nick's marriage, and you know, once I was right, once I was wrong, but it was a foolish thing to do, I think.
You ask some questions occasionally that are, I guess you have an instinct for what you can ask these people, because you asked Neil if he thinks he's going mad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting question to ask someone, and he answers it very seriously. He's afraid he might be.
Yeah.
And we're afraid he might be too, and so we're grateful to you that you have a relationship with him that allows that question to be asked, because the subject is right there on the screen.
There is, and there's one question, I think it was 35, 42, I asked Tony, when he was giving me another of what he was going to do with his life and all this. I think I said to him, but you know, you failed in everything. And I remember watching the film in an audience, you know, and the audience gasped, and I thought, that was a very tough question, you know, and maybe it was too tough, and I hadn't really even realized it until I'd sat in a crowd of people watching the film. But I think that's key to really what the film is about. It's my relationship with them, and I know how far I can go with them individually, how far I can push them, and you know, what they're emotional about. And I don't mean push their buttons so much, but and there's a trust between us, I think, you know, because none of them have ever turned their back on me and said, you know, they're unhappy with how it's been gone, how it's been treated, how it's been done, whatever. No one's ever turned their back on me, so no one's ever complained about it. So, you know, I think it's because of this very unusual relationship we have that, as you were saying, I mean, I know these people better than almost anybody alive. I've known them for 42 years.
Nobody else in their life has come into them every 7 years and asked them how they're doing.
No. And, you know, so I think it's because there's a sort of trust, and I know what they won't want to talk about, you know. And again, I mean, they're in a very powerful position, because as a longitudinal documentarian, you have to be on your best behavior, because if they say, I don't want to talk about sex, I don't want to talk about money or something like that, and you do it, and you use it, then they won't let you back in again. You know, so they do have a great power over me in some ways.
The first film very definitely sets itself up as being about the British class system.
Yes.
You have rich kids and poor kids, and you later said you wish you'd had more middle class people than you do. And then, as the years have gone past, has the class system persisted in their lives, or to what degree have some of them moved outside?
I think a lot of them have moved outside it. I think that kind of oppressive class barriers has diminished a lot, and it's a very deceptive film, because people say, well, is this a portrait of England? And I say, well, this is a portrait of people who were born in 1956. You know, this is a portrait of that generation. Had I started the film 7 years later, 10 years later, I think it would have been different. So it's very hard to draw a massive kind of conclusion or definitive view of English society. And I think that was the great kind of metamorphosis that the film and I went through, that it did definitely started out as with a political agenda. It was a very socialist left-wing company, Granada Television, working on a very, very provocative program, World in Action. Very left-wing, very aggressive, you know, and this was a film saying this is the state of the country, it's not good enough, you know, social barriers shouldn't exist, they're a great waste of people's time and talent. And the humanity of the film, I think, came out after 21, when we'd kind of grown through all that. And those arguments weren't meaningful anymore, but what was meaningful was the people.
When you think back to when they were born in 1956, in a sense that was still the old England. There were still shortages of consumer goods. There was still poverty. There was still the war wasn't over with yet in terms of economic well-being. And 63, when you film it, is that year that Larkin said sexual intercourse began in 1963. A little too late for me, between the ending of the Chatterley Band and the Beatles' first LP. 63 was the Beatles. And the Beatles, for many people, that year represents the difference between people wearing suits and ties and hats and everything since.
And that wasn't an accident.
Because when they grew up, especially the East Enders, they were growing up in an East End that was much the same as it might have been 20, 30, 40, 100 years earlier.
And it was no accident that this film got made in 1963 because people suddenly thought, is England changing? We had the theatre, we had Look Back in Anger, we had, as you say, music, we had fashion.
Angry young men in film.
Absolutely. So was English society changing, or was this cosmetic? And I think that's what the impulse. Everybody, England was waking, we were hoping, from a big sleep. The war was finally over, and people were having sexual intercourse and all this sort of thing. And this documentary just simply came out of that feeling that maybe there was a brave new world out there. And of course, this film had a huge dampening effect on it, because you could see it all might be all very well to have the Beatles album and Mary Quant and John Osborne and all that sort of thing, but for the everyday working life of people, this class system was very much alive and well. It was us and them. It was the empowered and the unempowered, and the difference between the two was dramatic. 7-year-olds hadn't a clue about their education, where they were going, what they were doing. There was very little parental support for them. They were at the mercy of the exigencies of the school, if it was a good school, if there was a compassionate teacher. Whereas, the empowered knew exactly what they were going to do and did exactly what they were going to do. But that's what's thrilling about the film, is that optimism in it, that generation, it was possible to come through, to break through, and it was my good luck to be of that time, 15 years older than that I could document that awakening, as I called it. Britain woke up in the 60s, America woke up after Eisenhower with Kennedy, and I documented that generation who assumed adulthood in that period, of time. And so it was a very dramatic, a very vivid sense of social movement, much more than had I started 10 years later or even 10 years earlier. I hit a period when life really did change very dramatically. The whole culture, both the American and the English culture, changed dramatically, culturally, politically, economically, every way, and my film, in a sense, is a history of that.
At the same time that their lives changed dramatically, their personalities didn't much. The thing that struck me, the very first Up film that I saw all those years ago, and I think it must have been 14 out, or certainly was 21 out, that in the faces of those children, already you see everything that you're going to see later. The personality, the slant on life. Now they may go through little dips and changes along the way, but at the end, when they're 49, they're the child that you saw at 7. It's almost as if whatever has happened by 7 is going to set the course.
Yeah. I mean, is that true? I mean, I think what you're saying is pretty much true. I think that core personality that you see at 7 doesn't much change. I mean, you can't predict people's lives. You don't know what is going to be thrown at people. You don't know what good luck, bad fortune, whatever is going to be thrown at people. But I think when you see these films, especially if you see them in a great bulk, I think you can see a core personality there. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, maybe the Jesuits were right. Show me the child until he is 7 and I will give you the man. You don't know what that man is going to be doing, but you can sense how he's going to react to stuff, how he's going to respond to it. Mm-hmm. That look in the eye, that twinkle in Neil's eye, which disappeared for generations, is coming back again.
Yeah. And wasn't he the one who at one point wanted to be a tour bus guide?
Yes, yes.
And he wanted to tell the people what to look at through the windows.
Yes, that's right.
And then later, after his period of wandering in the outskirts of society, he gets back on board running the village fete in the Shetland Islands.
Yes.
Which is, he's making people look at look at this.
Yeah.
He's still a tour bus guy.
Yeah.
Saying, here, I'm
in the play here,
yeah.
the drama.
And now, as a politician, he's also saying, I'm going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
He wants to kind of be the supervisor.
There you go. And I mean, it's interesting, one of the most socially mobile people people is Bruce,
Mhm.
who started out in a very privileged boarding school, and then St Paul's School, and then Oxford, and then was teaching Bangladeshi children. But even in those early, one of the first things he said at 7, I want to be a missionary. There's a kind of compassion in that 7-year-old face that is never going to leave him, that will be with him his whole life. That's his essence, and that essence was manifest at 7.
And even though he, at the end, is teaching in a school with a better salary and drives a better car,
Sure.
Actually a teacher is a missionary no matter who the students are, I
Yeah.
suppose.
So, it is, because people say to me, well, what are the great lessons you can draw? Can you predict people's lives? I don't think you can predict people's lives. But I think there is something at the heart of this film which shows that, life is eternal, that people's spirit lives on.
Now, although you've, with one exception, you kept to the 7-year rule,
Yeah.
what would you do if you found that one of your subjects was dying?
This is extremely worrying, I mean, it's a question now we have to face. I mean, there's no one in mind at all, but it now becomes part of the agenda.
I think in 56 Up, I wouldn't want to hear your voice saying so-and-so died. I think I would almost want to see them in, this sounds so bad, but I hope you understand the spirit in which I mean it. I would like to hear their thoughts when they realize that the end may be coming.
So you think I should do it?
Well, that's the last chance they'll have.
Yeah. I think
so-
you're right. I think it would be too cold, because this has been troubling me, I suppose, for the last 20 years. How do I handle that? I hope I go first, I hope that they all outlive me.
If you should go first, though, shouldn't somebody else continue on? Shouldn't this project continue until
I don't
everyone
know.
is...
I think it should.
When I became a film critic, I had no idea that you could do it for more than 5 years.
Right.
And I certainly had no idea that I wanted to spend my life being a film critic. But now as I look back after 40 years, that's what I've done. And so there's a reconciliation.
Right.
And with these people, first of all, most of them are happy.
Yeah.
Many of them have grandchildren. Maybe do they all? No.
Not quite. No.
But and they love their grandchildren.
Right.
And basically they're happy with their children. They have a few worries with this one or that one. But there's pride in their voices.
Yeah.
And the returns are in. I mean, earlier, they're still striving.
Mhm.
They're still, I've got to prove myself. I've got to find my own way. Now, whatever has happened, it's happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of the returns are in. And they can see maybe that this film that they were in was a wonderful opportunity for them, which they didn't necessarily love or embrace, but
Yeah.
that it happened to them
I think
too.
that's right, because I think they've behaved with dignity throughout it,
Mhm.
and they've been treated with dignity. One of them, Sue, the wife of Paul, I didn't think I was able to use it. She just had a wonderful expression about how every life is an act of courage and everybody has a story. And that's what I love about the films, is that these are ordinary lives, ordinary stories, but they're told in such a dignified way, and they elevate the ordinary life to real drama and real dignity. And I think they're beginning to realize that. I just got a sense for the first time that there was some pride in it.
Well, as I said, I really felt that they're happier now than they've ever been before as a group.
Yeah.
And they're wiser.
Mhm.
They're wiser about life. You do learn, don't you, as you
Yeah.
grow older, a few things. If we had any piece of film at all from the year 1000 or the year 500, it'd be fascinating to see.
Mm.
Or those first films in Paris of the people coming out of the metro when they were inventing the cinema. Just look at those people and we think, well, no, I'm looking at somebody who was alive in 1898. This project, as it continues and finally concludes and becomes a piece of film, 56 Up, 63 Up, 70 Up, then 100 years from now, 200 years from now, how fascinating this will be. What a film to show in a classroom 200 years from now.
I think the big contribution I made to all this is just to keep it going. It would have been easy to have stopped it, to have moved on and just carried on doing the movies and all that. And sometimes you tear your hair out trying to get them all to agree to do it and all all this. It's the most arduous part of actually making the film, is that period when I ring them up and say the time is coming up, and they say, oh, well, I'm not sure whether... But, you know, we've hung in. I mean, Claire Lewis, who's worked with me for the last 4, and Margaret Bottomley, who died, who did the early ones. We've kind of just hung in with it and kept it going. And people say to me, you know, when's it going to stop? And I think, well, it shouldn't stop. It should just keep it going, you know. I mean, and as you said, when I go, someone else could take it over. But it's such... And, you know, when the guys who won't do it, I say, you don't have to do a long, difficult interview. Just come in and count to 10, you know, just to look at you, just to see your face. Because both of them have had such interesting lives, Peter and Charles. And you don't have to go through the arduousness of me interviewing them, and you know, you can do whatever you want, but just to see these people, which is what you're saying, just the simple human history at its most simple. And film does that so brilliantly, doesn't it? Because it's so complicated, much more powerful, dare I say, than a book. The equivalent of this is just there's so much information coming at you out of the corner of your eye. You know, the way their haircuts change, the way their clothes change, the way the backgrounds change. It just gives you just a history, doesn't it? And it's not a pushy history. It's not a political history. It doesn't try to make points. It's just dealing with these people's lives. As I said, it dignifies the ordinary life. This great world of celebrity and whatever that we're living in, which may get worse as it goes on, who knows, but it does honour the ordinary life, and I think that's what I think the most powerful thing about it is, and I'm just happy that I hung in with it.
Well, I am too. I think it's the most noble use of film that I've been able to witness as a film goer, and noble in its simplicity and its honesty and its directness and its lack of pretension or grandiosity. Just the gaze of an interested observer coming into these lives and saying, how you doing?
Yeah, and it also, I mean, it is a family too. I mean, I've kept the same people with me. I mean, George Turner's shot it since 21, and Kim Horton's edited it since 28, and you know, I just keep people around, and there is, I mean, it sounds a bit nauseating, oh, it's a big family, a big happy family, because it's tough stuff what we talk about sometimes, but nonetheless there's a feeling of love about it which kind of transmits, which, you know, you could take anybody apart, and you could make a film of these 12 people and take them apart and all that sort of stuff and show bad sides and laugh at them and whatever,
Yeah.
but you know, I never felt that I don't think the films have ever been kind of sycophantic in a sense. I think they've kind of had a balanced look at it, but nonetheless, underneath it all is an affection for them, which I think is important than any piece of film, any work of art in a sense. You know, there has to be a feeling. You know, out of feeling and love comes any sort of art, I think.
Well, I'm just happy that there's going to be a 56 up.
Yeah, God
And
willing.
we hope a 63 and so forth.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you about it, because I really think that if you're going to devote your life as I have to writing about the films, it validates that career choice of mine
Right.
and all these careers that you've had
Yeah.
in this film, that there's a project like this, because it shows how film is a time machine and is an empathetic device like no other. And the fact that you've worked on this and stuck with it at great inconvenience, and despite the resentment of your subjects on occasion, has produced a great work.
Well, thank you. I'm honoured that you should think so.